Hello, I'm Robin and welcome to Molten Modular. Today we're looking for some full immersion into This Is Not Rocket Science's Bopp and Steve. Bopp and Steve it's really a love story of a module. It's a conversation, supposedly, between two entities, Bopp and Steve. And what they do within space is that they pull apart the natural components of Reverb and rebuild them again into something even more spectacular. Now, I've had Bopp and Steve for quite a while. I wrote a review for Sound of Sound magazine. I was very focused, very absolutely knowing exactly what's going on. And through that review, I think I uncovered most of what it was about, including a healthy dose of bafflement, where you are just playing with these parameters with no real solid idea as to what's going on. And that is part of the majestic nature of this machine. Since writing that review, which was several months ago, it has knocked around constantly in my case, and it's just this it's this thing of beauty that you inject things into, and out the other side just comes this soundscape, this wash, this blurb, this shimmering sound of otherworldliness. So at any moment I could drop into it and everything just goes away into the distance. It's a fantastic thing to play with. Now, sadly, This Is Not Rocket Science need it back. Drat. So I'm going to have to let this go. So I thought that I would sit down with it just for like an hour or something and play in order to hopefully get across to you what it is about this module in particular that's very, very special. I'll take you through some bits and pieces as well as we go, as far as I understand it, because I don't fully comprehend it. But I think there's a lot in here to enjoy, to chew over, and I'm sure there's lots of different ways to use it, and I'm only really scratching the surface because there's a certain thing that I like. I like this very, very much. Now, in some ways, this is kind of rings into clouds, isn't it? I suppose it is. This to me is peak rings into clouds, because clouds was a module from Multiple Instruments that I never got along with. I just could not understand it. I would sit there and go, okay, it's a nice reverb. I don't understand these other things. I'm pressing buttons and turning things and don't have no grasp of what is actually occurring and how I'm supposed to enjoy that. But there was certainly an element of sticking a plucky sound into this clouds granular reverb that was very, very pleasing. And you could attain that. Even I could attain that. But I wasn't really sucked into the whole idea of clouds as many people have been. This, on the other hand, this is a whole different story. With this, knobs do things. There seems to be an actual correlation between moving a thing and hearing that occur. This, if you like, is curated to the point where there's avenues and pathways that you can follow in order to generate the particular sound that you're after. And that for me elevates it far beyond anything like clouds. This is also the first time I've actually enjoyed granular. I find granular a bit kind of, what? I don't know why I want that. often. Whereas here, I'm starting to get it. I'm starting to find those little bits, and as it tumbles and falls and cascades, there's these bits of beauty that just fall out of it that I've not encountered before. I've always found that I fight with granular, whereas here there's just something a bit special. This video also gives me the opportunity to play with the new SuperKar Plus from Strymon. This is essentially a pluck, a surface module that uses a Kar Plus Strong algorithm to generate these wonderful physically modelled plucky sounds. Which I really enjoy. So as I say, with the Strymon, with the SuperKar Plus, into the Bopp and Steve, just ecstasy. said. It's just a wonderfully entertaining, extraordinarily immersive, engaging, beguiling place to spend your time. It's fantastic. Now I can sit here all day and just twiddle and lose myself in the depth and the essence of this entire deconstructed universe. But I think perhaps it might be useful if I poke at a few things just to show you exactly what it's doing, bring you in a bit closer, have a little bit of a look, a little bit more of a play. Let's do that. Right, so what is it all about? So the Bopp and Steve is essentially a deconstructed reverb. Within a reverb, you usually get some kind of pre-delay, you then get some kind of space, and then you then get some parameters that affect the depth and length and such like of that. What Bopp and Steve essentially does is pull those things out so that you get a separate delay and a separate space machine, if that makes sense, with some other things in between as well. I mean, I have to say that very often when you get some kind of multi-effects unit, you get to choose between these things. You get a delay and then you can swap to a reverb. That always frustrates me because whenever I want to use a delay, I also still want to have the reverb because I'm still trying to place it in space. And Bopp and Steve does this beautifully because you have this journey from left to right, journey through these bits here, into this bit and into this. And you can mix the delay and the reverb tails completely independently, giving you such a wonderful level of control over the entire generative space. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. Absolutely beautiful thing. However, at the beginning, there's something which I don't quite understand, but we're going to play with that. We're going to take you through each bit in turn just to show you what's going on. I'm going to stick the wet dry mix all the way up because just to emphasize the effect that's happening. You probably wouldn't necessarily do that, although I think the manual does suggest you do that and then you turn it down on other things, but you know, it depends on how you want to use it. So currently we are bypassed. So you have this diffuse thing at the front end. Now, what is it? So apparently it's a number of filters that create a smattering of diffused sound. It's like placing your sound in a space initially before it then gets smeared all over the place. If I just set something going, perhaps, then we turn the diffuse up. There's the difference. So the only knob you have for this is flavor. So you get stuff further away, you get stuff closer to. There's definitely something going on there. It's not an area of this that I've really particularly spent any time with or focused on, and I think you can absolutely direct your attention just to these two knobs and play with that if that's exciting to you. To me, not so much, but there's definitely something going on, a shifting, a change, a placement, something. Enough about that. I'm going to completely ignore it and move on to the delay. So we have 3 different delays. We have a Pingpong, a Waveguide and a Multitap. Now the Pingpong for the most part gives you a left and right delay. You've then got a couple of knobs. You've got feedback, which we tend to know what that does. As you turn that up, it feeds it back into itself and builds or continues, potentially going into some kind of distortion. It just depends on what you're doing. Like so. Then you've got this pattern knob here, which does different things depending on the delay. With the Pingpong, it changes the length. What does it do exactly? Changes the length of the left and right delays in relation to each other. So let's clear it. So it essentially offsets how they feel about each other. You've also got length. At the moment I've got this clocked to a clock for no reason. It's just so nice. It's a lovely thing. Now let's go to Waveguide. Waveguide is like sticking something down a pipe and making it rattle about the place. Length is about lengthening that pipe, I think, but in here somewhere it gets really interesting. There's something spectacular about that. Really, you just pull it into the edge of itself, and it's just amazing. Is anybody else feeling 1960s War of the Worlds? Lovely, that's waveguiding. Then you've got multitap, which is kind of a bit more of a traditional delay, I suspect. Now, the interesting thing about the pattern knob on this one is that it's essentially a tilt filter. So at the moment it's all low growl. So now we're emphasising the highs. Back somewhere in the middle. So it can create these sort of low end rumbles, which are really, really nice. So that is the delay section. Next, we have the tail. Now the tail is essentially the reverb section here. It's always ready to go. And you've got three modes here similar to the delay. The first one is dense, and this is, I don't know, it's the most of it. It's the very full end of things. It's like you've entirely found yourself in the midst of a massive cloud of stuff. So let's stick with this in the middle somewhere. Let's start off with it low, and then let's just bring it up. Phew, it's gone away. So at its very lowest setting, it has a good load of just reflections. But as you bring it up, very quickly pushes out into a much larger world. temperature knob gets really interesting at this point. It's again another tilt filter, so you can sort of just then shift the whole frequency spectrum of this enormous cloud in one direction or the other. Let's bring it a little bit more under control. Then the chorality knob here brings in extra voices, I think. It detunes, sort of like a chorus effect. If I run something through it again. Next you've got flute, which is probably where I find myself most often because it's a softer approach. It's got less stuff going on, it's smoother, it feels more natural somehow. Just has a lovely space to it. Then you can use the temperature knob here to either dampen it a bit or to push it into like a high octave shimmer. The chorus or chorality is a little bit softer and lighter. And then finally you get Sparse, which is where the sort of the more granular stuff is messing about. Hear that? No, me neither. There we go. So it likes it slices it up and plays some bits back one way and then another. It's really nice. Now the chorality changes the probability of things happening. And then once again we've got a tilt filter. And this gets particularly interesting when you bring the delay back in. Because of course you've got all of that sitting there ready to shuffle its way through. Let's just try to bring us back to normality. And it is, of course, once you start bringing the other sections back in, that it just snowballs into this other machine, this other thing. And I might just shave the wet dry down a little bit. Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Now, this can all get completely messed up by this other feature, pitch shifting. Pitch shifting, why does it have pitch shifting? Nobody knows. It's not important. It's just that it's there, so we might as well give it a bit of a go. So to make this happen, what I'm going to do is run a sequence into here and then use the MIDI keyboard to shift the pitch. Yeah, that's what it's supposed to do, apparently. So I'm going to put that into there. I've got MIDI coming from the keyboard going into here. So what you do, let's take this out for the moment. So what you do is you place the pitch at where you want to shift. So at the moment it's kind of off, it's not allocated to anywhere. So I press this button here and I can put it at the beginning, or before the diffuse knob, or before the delay, or I'm not sure where that one's going, before the tail. Oh, it went somewhere else, I think. And then at the output. So they all have different effects depending on where you're placing the pitch. I'm not going to say that this is my favorite thing about this module in particular, but it certainly gives you some interesting things to do. So let me just attempt to show you. See, what you'd hope is when I press something would happen. Definitely something going on. Let's move it to the next place, which is before the diffuse. I might need to turn the diffuse up in order to make this function. Let's shift it to the delay. So that was pitched into the feedback, which is particularly interesting. It's the sort of thing that requires further investigation, I should think. But you do also have the ability to transpose around that pitch shifting. You have some control over different things that happen as you do that, whether it's portamento or glide. And there's one other thing, which is that you can use the envelope here as modulation elsewhere. We can also play the SuperKar Plus polyphonically. Bopp and Steve then. What a remarkable piece of work. What a sort of a journey. It takes you on this exploration of stuff. It puts you on a train that you just don't want to get off. And you keep messing and playing and pushing, dripping, all sorts of things. I mean, I guess it's the experience that you get with many space reverbs. Anything that gives you that huge sound that just seems to envelop you. There are a few of those around. But what I like in particular about Bopp and Steve is just how it's been pulled apart. And how you're encouraged to explore each separate aspect of this reverb differently. To the point where it seems, you know, a missed opportunity to not use every part, to not explore the delay that you wouldn't normally do in a reverb, and then explore the tail of that reverb like you wouldn't necessarily normally do. I mean, reverbs, generally speaking, you go hall or room and then you go wet and dry, and that tends to be about it. But that's not what you find in here. This is encouraging you, willing you, egging you on to do a lot more. And it becomes, I guess I'm not really seeing it as a reverb. I'm seeing it as a multi-effects box. A box of delay into reverb, into granulation and shimmer. And that is totally absorbing. Absolutely. And that's what I like. I could very easily plug a guitar into this and have a lovely time, as I'm pretty much doing with the quite remarkable SuperKar Plus, which is doing a little phenomenal job there of being that plucked string, which is the perfect source for this kind of thing. So there you go. Sadly, I've got to give it back. Maybe I'll come up with the cash to buy one myself sometime. But otherwise, yeah, it's a really fascinating thing to explore. There's a lot more in the pitch shifting side of things that I haven't really shown because it's not quite so interesting to me. But if you were, for instance, to put your voice through it, you'll certainly experience something very, very different with that pitch shifting. But overall, just to say, it's a beautiful, deep, shimmering module that I've thoroughly enjoyed using. I hope that was helpful. In the meantime, go make some tunes.